Hey, good Friday morning. Welcome inside Mr. Small's Theater. Once again, for the first time in 2019, it's Gike's Got Game. I'm your host, Matt Geitka, and may I be the last to wish you a Happy New Year. We took 2 weeks off here on the program. Last time we spoke, it was even before the Christmas holiday, so plenty to catch up on. I'll try to keep it as current as possible, as always, here on this show. And as always, you can find me on social media. That's where you can fire back your scathing or complimentary input, no matter which it might be. It could be both at the same time. You never know. Find me on Twitter at Matt Geitka, MattGajtka. I'm also on Facebook, same name, plus media at the end, and that's where I live stream every show as well. Thanks to Brian Crawford for handling all the technical aspects of the program. So much to get to in the next 52 minutes, so I'll do my best to take a skate around the Pittsburgh sports world and also just in general, everything from the world of big-time and small-time athletics that caught my eye and I thought was worth mentioning here and digging into. Later on in today's show, I'll tell you who I think was the best person in sports from this past week, and he doesn't reside here in western Pennsylvania. In fact, he's on the western shore of Lake Michigan at a place called Halas Hall. You may know where I'm going with this one, but I'll give you the full reveal in due time. Also, in a new segment here on today's show, I want to take a lap around the Pittsburgh sports world, give you some news and my quick views on some things that have happened over the past 7 days. Yes, we'll limit it to that since I don't want to have to go on and on and on all the things that have happened since the last time I spoke to you here from Mr. Small's Theater in Millvale. Also, shame on Adidas for one big mistake, I think, in sports design that they committed and they foisted upon the world and that we'll all have to suffer through, especially if you're a hockey fan coming up in a couple of weeks. But to start today's show, let's get into the hardcore Penguins talk because the Penguins are back as contenders in most people's eyes, and they're fun to talk about again if you are a Penguins fan, I'm sure. You could always drown your sorrows in the Steelers and their week-by-week drama, and believe me, we'll get to that in a little bit too in segment number 2. But with regards to the Penguins and their quest to win 3 Stanley Cups in 4 years, so many were writing them off as about a month ago. You know me, I kept saying be patient, wait until the new year, wait until halfway through the season. Well, we are halfway through the season, and there they are, right there near the top of the Metro Division, right there near the top of anyone, short of the Lightning and the Maple Leafs in the entire NHL. So I feel a bit vindicated based upon what's happened in the past month or so. The Penguins won 8 in a row. Yeah, they lost to Chicago, but they always lose to Chicago. I'm not trying to figure that one out any more than I have to. They got back on track with a win the other day against the Florida Panthers, and they find themselves just 4 points out of first in the Metro Division, just 4 shy of the Capitals, who seemed like they were going to skate away with this thing as of about a month ago or even a couple of weeks ago. But that's what an 8-game win streak will do for you. If you're the Penguins, they've won 9 out of their past 10. Actually, 10 of their past 11. That's the best streak over that similar type of a span in the entire 31-team league. So they're doing a lot of things right. But the biggest thing that's gone right for them lately is not spectacular play from Sidney Crosby, although he's been awesome. It certainly hasn't been Evgeny Malkin, who's still in a scoring slump as of the moment. It hasn't been Derek Brassard picking up his play, although he has, and he's looking better and looking more and more like that third-line center the Penguins thought that they were getting at the trade deadline last spring. It hasn't even been Chris Letang playing at a Norris-caliber level because he's been there for this entire year. No, it's been pretty simple. The goaltending has just been better, and specifically Matt Murray has just been better. And athletic performance is tough to pin down in a lot of ways. It's tough to project because we're talking about one individual. In many ways, it's easier to say such and such a team, or if you're talking about the sport of football, on the defensive side or on the offensive side, things will get better because of track record, because we know that when you get bigger numbers of players together, bigger numbers of individual data points together, it's easier to project that because there's some wiggle room there. If one guy or one player falls off, there's someone else to pick him or her up, or vice versa. But when projecting individual performance, so much of it is subject to not just chance, but also things that we can't look into necessarily. Personal matters, things away from the ice. In the case of Matt Murray last year, he had his worst season out of 3 in the NHL. But right in the middle of that year, he lost his father, who passed away due to cancer. And I was willing to give him a complete pass for the regular season, even for the postseason, because of that. I don't know what that's like to lose a parent I especially don't know what it's like to lose a parent in the midst of having a very high-profile job, performing on a big stage, 80 some times a year. You factor in playoffs and preseason, make it close to 100 times a year. So I can't relate. All I can do is try to sympathize. And so coming into this season, I felt like Matt Murray had a lot to prove, yes, but also I felt like there was reason to believe he would get back to the level we saw in his first 1.5 seasons at the NHL level, especially the first 2 postseasons that he had. The Stanley Cup runs that he put together in his first 2 years in the league, I'm not sure anyone's matched them shy of, say, Ken Dryden or Patrick Waugh going way back in the annals of hockey history. So when Matt Murray was not looking so good through 2.5, even 3 months of this season, I felt like there were legitimate concerns because he hadn't put together a huge track record at this level. This was not, for instance, a Marc-Andre Fleury, who you could say, yeah, he had some ups and downs, but overall, he's been at worst a league average goalie in the vast majority of his NHL seasons. And now in the past 5 or 6 seasons for Marc-Andre, even though he's now into his early to mid-30s, there's a lot of a track record there. In the case of Matt Murray, yes, he's reached the highest heights. In a lot of ways, he did things that Marc-Andre never did here in town, to stretch that comparison, which we all have, both out loud and within our minds, I'm sure. So Murray didn't have that to fall back on. And I know that so many really value the playoff performance well above regular season performance. I don't do that necessarily. In fact, I might undervalue playoff performance when it comes down to it. Tough to say one way or another because, yes, pressure is a real thing, but also these are smaller sample sizes that we're dealing with. Feather in his cap for playing as well as he did in the playoffs, but it didn't make me feel any better about his long-term projection as an NHL goalie and as someone the Penguins could hang their hats on as their number one starter for, say, 5 or 6 or 7 years to come when it came time to think about signing him to an extension. But since Matt Murray got back on the ice, since he got healthy in his past 8 games, I'll just look over to our friends at Pittsburgh Hockey Now and my former colleague Dan Kingerski over there. He wrote it up well this past week. Murray had an .877 save percentage before being placed on injured reserve on Thanksgiving Day. That was a lower body injury, and injuries are a concern too with Murray as well. So underperformance and durability, those were big concerns as of about a month ago. And an .877 save percentage, just to put it in context, the average save percentage in the NHL this year has fallen from recent seasons, but it's still .909. The last year that .877 was acceptable was 1988-89. That's the last time that average was anywhere around there. So we're talking 3 decades ago, and plenty of advances ago in the world of hockey goaltending. So by any stretch of the imagination, Matt Murray had been a big disappointment and arguably culprit number one why the Penguins weren't where they expected to be at Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving I'm talking about. You always have to make that designation in the world of hockey with so many Canadians involved. But that's always the point where you look and you say, okay, it's time to start making serious evaluations through 2 months of the season. You get in about a third of the way, and you can say, well, what's wrong, what's going well, what's not going well. What wasn't going well for the Penguins was mostly Matt Murray, with maybe a side of Jack Johnson and overall the defense corps shy of Chris Letang, because Justin Schultz was out, maybe Ole Mata wasn't performing like you wanted him to, and, some trades had to be made, and Marcus Pettersson was brought in. And the D-Corps has gotten a little bit better. They've been at least improved slightly in the past month. But the big thing that's happened is the goaltending's gotten better. And Matt Murray, over his past 8 games, to cut to the chase, has a .963 save percentage rate. He's never been this good over an 8-game span in his entire career, regular season or playoffs. He's allowed only 17 goals in his past 8 games. That's just 2 per game. And in this NHL era of increased offense, 2 per game is really, really good. I know back maybe 20 years ago, Dominik Hasek and Marty Brodeur were putting up goals against averages under 2, but they weren't giving up a lot of shots. There was a ton of clutching and grabbing in the NHL, and just generally offense was down. In this era where offensive talent is starting to really dominate, and we're going to have 15 to 20 100-point scorers this year, which is just eye-popping, to give up 17 goals over an 8-game span is special. And we're even seeing Matt Murray, for instance, the other night against the Florida Panthers. Really a wide-open game, but the Penguins won it running away, partially because maybe some shooting luck, partially because Roberto Luongo wasn't very good at the other end of the ice, but also partially because Matt Murray made some huge saves. And He's making breakaway saves again. He's starting to steal some goals away. And there's a really cool advanced stat in goaltending these days. It's called goals saved above average. It factors in, based on scoring chances, based on just raw volume of shots faced, how many goals to the plus or to the minus a particular goaltender is. And I know I mentioned save percentage. That's usually the be-all, end-all stat for me. But it's so tough to separate goaltending from how a team is playing defensively. Certain goalies are given a tough hand. They're dealt a tough hand because their teams aren't playing very well in front of them, and they give up a ton of high-danger scoring chances, if you will. Carey Price, if you look into the advanced numbers this year, I think he's probably getting the short end of the stick up in Montreal because the Habs give up a ton of shots in the slot, whereas the Penguins, last year they were like that. This year they're better. But even considering that, Matt Murray is 5 goals saved above average after being 8 below average last year. So even with the tough workload that Murray had last season, he was still a big liability, and especially in the regular season. He just couldn't seem to get it together. But in the past 8 games, he's been so good that the Penguins are probably looking better than they actually are. Like I mentioned earlier, I still think the defense core with Jack Johnson as a primary culprit is not as good as it needs to be. Getting Justin Schultz back will help them generate at the offensive end. I'm still not sure from a shot prevention standpoint the Penguins are at top of the line. But with the high-end offensive talent they have, with guys like Crosby, and we're hoping eventually Malkin will come around, with Phil Kessel, guys who can bury their chances more than the average player. Jake Gensel recently signed to a long-term deal. Put him in that area too. With players like that, and with Matt Murray back to this level, if we're assuming this is going to be his level or somewhere close, then yeah, the Penguins are contenders again. And all those naysayers, all those doubts that were coming out from professional media, from fans in the previous calendar year, I think you can put those away. I think this Penguins team is still in a spot with this type of goaltending where they can compete. And I hate to reduce hockey to goaltending. I'm not one of those guys who says you might as well rename the sport goalie because of how important that position is. We've heard Ken Hitchcock, in fact, a longtime NHL coach, say that in the past. I'm not saying he's necessarily wrong, but I think the numbers have borne it out that you have to be an elite team from a 5-on-5 perspective to have a really good shot of winning a Stanley Cup. Yeah, you can win a round or two if your goalie is very, very good and maybe your team's average, or you can get knocked out early if your goalie is bad. We can all agree that if goaltending is bad, you can't win the Stanley Cup. But if it's average and your team is really, really good, that's good enough, typically. Just look back to those Red Wings teams that had Chris Osgood in net. The 07-08 Red Wings that beat the Penguins, of course, 11 years ago. Or the team the following year that probably should have beaten the Penguins again in the Stanley Cup final, but the Penguins got by them. Those two teams didn't have great goaltending. Your opinions on Chris Osgood may vary, but he was average at best. So it can be overcome, especially if you're really, really good. And that's what's really scary about, say, the Tampa Bay Lightning right now. They're running away with the regular season race here in the NHL, and they have a goaltender in Andrei Vasilevsky who could probably steal you a couple of games in the playoffs or even a playoff round. So they have it all going for them. I think the Lightning are still the number one favorite, but the Penguins, I would put them right there with the Leafs because of Matt Murray's resurgence, and if he can keep this up somewhere around this level, I like him to be right there behind Tampa in terms of favorites. And as I was saying, individual performance, who can figure it out? Maybe you give a lot of credit to Mike Buckley, the goaltending coach. He's worked with Matt Murray for the past several years, both away from the Penguins and now with the Penguins in an official capacity for the past 3 or 4. Give him credit. It's tough to say how much credit, but give him some credit. Give credit to Murray for coming back from that injury and looking better than ever. Maybe he just needed to take a step back and get away, even with all the success that he's had at the top level of the sport, raising 2 Stanley Cups. Even with that, recent results can get you down, and confidence can be an issue. Mike Sullivan talks about it all the time. Confidence is something you can't account for. You can try to be steadfast and be rock solid in your mental approach and in your physical approach and your preparation, and then hopefully that can smooth out the ups and downs that go with confidence and lack thereof. But perhaps just that step away from the rink helped Murray get to where he is right now. Now he's the type of goalie that the Penguins were hoping he would be, and it's funny how that can really simplify things and make the team look really good. And I wouldn't bet against the Penguins to win the Metropolitan Division. Yeah, they're 4 points back of a quality squad, obviously, in the Washington Capitals, but they are playing the way they basically have all year, with the added ability of having some confidence in the man between the pipes. And as I've said, that can go a long way. Let's take a break here on Geiks Got Game. Thank you for tuning in again, first show of 2019. And, working into our 4th year here on this radio station on the River's Edge. You can find us at riversedgepgh.com, 24/7 audio stream, talk, and music. And as I said, I stream the video live on the River's Edge Facebook page and on my own Facebook page, Matt Geica Media. Back in all those forums, live here on this Friday morning to take a lap around the Pittsburgh sports world. Newer segment, but it's kind of an adjustment. It's kind of an evolution of some things I've been doing on this show for 3+ seasons now. This is Matt Geica, and I'll be back with you on the other side of this break.
Hey, it's Mike Sasson. Guess what? You used to love us at 10. You're going to love us even more at 9. It's me. It's Alex. It's funniness. It's guests. It's all sorts of me yelling into microphones only 1 hour earlier. It's exactly what you need at 9 o'clock. It's like a shot of adrenaline. It's the Mike Sasson Show, now starting at 9 o'clock on Tuesday on the River's Edge, a new kind of radio.
And we're here at Mr. Small's Theater. I am Matt Geica, your host, alongside Brian Crawford, engineer, and also the host of River Talk. You can go to riversedgepgh.com to find the script for the entire week. In fact, we're looking at a day change for my show, and looking to bring this one to Mondays. So Monday at 9 a.m. is an open time slot ahead of Brian's River Talk, which plays at 10. Of course, if you're a longtime listener of the show, you know that. And just a better scheduling situation for myself. So keep an eye out for notifications. As Ray Haluska on Facebook says, he had his notification pop up, and he was happy to have that. So the feature does work. I'm not one for notifications. I don't know about you, Brian. I'll bring Brian Crawford in here too. I feel like there's so much going on my phone and so many distractions with social media especially. I work in media with Robert Morris University and a couple other entities. It's just, I have enough things going on. I don't have the notifications. I don't have a lot of bings or buzzes or bells or whistles on my phone, but I understand the convenience of it. How about you? How do you feel?
I live on notifications.
Okay.
And here's why, though. So, like, with this network, we have all of these shows that need to be up and on the air, and so I have my calendar that notifies me on my phone every single time a show is supposed to air, and then I'm like, oh, shoot, did I remember to add that? And then I can check. So whenever you're running, I actually think you would. I'm surprised you don't like notifications, because I feel like when you're a busy person and there's too much to juggle and there's too much to manage, it's nice to let some computer do some of the work for you.
Maybe you're right, yeah.
My memory is too
like
short, though.
I'm weird like that sometimes, Brian, because I'm not one to say, the world was better 20 years ago. I think in many ways it's never been a better time to be alive because of all these advances and things that can take care of things for me. But I also have a bit of an ego, and I think, well, I can remember that. I'm fine. I don't need to pawn this off on some algorithm or some machine. But at a certain point, discretion is the better part of valor, and you can say, all right, I'll be better off by outsourcing this this to something else. So like you said, you do have notifications here for the station. You're a big Google fan, I know that. We've had Alexa in the studio for a while. We have it in our house, too.
Yeah, Alexa's fantastic.
Yeah, we don't have her set up for notifications necessarily in our household. But so how was your holiday, Brian? I did want to catch up with you a little bit here.
It was great. Yeah. It was a good time. Just so I had New Year's Eve off. I had all of the holidays off, which was incredible.
That's spectacular.
Which is, unreal, given my extremely low seniority at my job. So I was not expecting that. But yeah, so it was a good time. I just spent the Christmas night with the family, and then New Year's Eve I spent with some friends at a party that I was able to walk home from. So that was nice.
Yeah, how about that? That's always a benefit.
Yeah.
No matter what religion you might belong to, no matter whether you're an atheist or a spiritual person, I think it's a cool time of the year to get together with friends and have a nice reset. I've often said, including on this show, that New Year's Day is my favorite holiday because you get that fresh slate. So here we are, starting it fresh again here on Geiks Got Game. Thanks for engineering, as always.
Yeah, and I do want to say New Year's Eve, one thing that's so special about it that I love is you mentioned no matter what religion you are, you can appreciate that day. And I love the fact that there's no controversy about it. There's no people who are for or against. It's
Yes.
just everybody from all races, all backgrounds, all religions come together to celebrate the death of the old year
Yes.
and bring in the new.
I love that part. And in that vein, that's why I want to try to do some different things here on the program. So, well, we'll hear from you on Monday for River Talk, and we'll hear from me on Monday, God willing, here coming up. So, again, a change. Change is usually good, I think. It helps refresh. And so let's take a lap around the Pittsburgh sports world, shall we? And the biggest news from this past week continues to come from the team that's not even playing right now. It's the Steelers. They sat out the first week of the NFL playoffs, of course. You probably know that if you are watching the show or listening to it. No big surprise. They couldn't get it done in some big games down the stretch. The loss against the Raiders probably cost them. The loss at the Saints literally cost them and put them on the outside looking in. And well, not even the Browns could help them. They nearly did, but they didn't take care of business at Baltimore. So all old news, like I said. Don't want to focus on that too much. But what's come out after the fact with their star wide receiver, maybe the best wide receiver still in the league, even going into his age 31 season, Antonio Brown, and all of the drama that happened that week. It's funny to think back to that week, and you heard the reports that, well, Antonio might be hurt. It popped up later in the week, and maybe he really was hurt. Maybe his knee really was bothering him. But the way he handled the situation, eventually having his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, call Mike Tomlin and say, yeah, my guy's ready, even though Brown went AWOL that week and apparently got into a spat with Ben Roethlisberger during practice. Yeah, you're probably saying we know all that. But the news that came out yesterday, Jerry Dulac of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reported it. He had a one-on-one sit-down with Steelers president Art Rooney II, and Mr. Rooney said some interesting things, especially one thing where he said he'd be surprised if Brown would be back for training camp in July. And I think we all expected, or at least I did, that it's at least a 50-50 shot for Antonio to be traded or moved to some other team. But to hear the chief, not the original chief, obviously, the original Art Rooney, but the chief's son, to hear the guy in charge down at the South Side say that, yeah, he's not coming back, that really hit home for me and made me realize that, wow, this really is happening. And this divorce, which seems rather sudden to some of us out here in the public, I know for some of people I know who cover the team on a day-to-day basis, they're not as surprised by this development. They have seen this thing percolating for a while. But even so, we've seen teams and their star players mend fences. Doesn't appear like it's going to happen this time. And for me, I understand both sides of the argument where you say, well, make it work. Figure something out. This guy's one of the best ever in the sport. And certainly, like I said, probably the best of his era in terms of production. I know he hasn't won a Super Bowl. He hasn't been even to a Super Bowl as a Steeler. But I don't think it's really of any fault of his own. The one time I would say they had the best chance of going to the Super Bowl in 2015, he was hurt, didn't make the trip up to Denver. And in my feeling, that was the best Steelers team of this decade since the last time they made the Super Bowl. So, yeah, bad luck comes into play. But maybe you start to think perhaps some of this underperformance from the Steelers in certain situations, maybe some of the strife that we had heard coming out of the locker room, maybe it wasn't all just Le'Veon Bell or Ben Roethlisberger being a drama king or Mike Tomlin being unable to keep his team under control and keep them on the straight and narrow. Maybe a lot of this is because of number 84. So this could be a case where it seems sudden to everyone on the outside, but on the inside, maybe a long time coming. So it's been fun watching Antonio go about his business, but from all that we've heard from that last week before the final game of the regular season, I have a hard time blaming anyone in the Steelers if they say sayonara to AB. And the way he's been acting on social media, too, it seems like he wants to go as well. So perhaps best for both to part ways. It's just why we've gotten to this point. 2 weeks ago, none of us would have been thinking about this. And now we're thinking about the post-Brown era in Pittsburgh. So that's the biggest news, obviously. Let's go on to the Penguins, where unfortunately, that win against the Panthers that I was talking about, that wide-open affair, it was also very physical. It was also very contentious between two teams that don't typically have any kind of bad blood between them. But Zach Aston Reese, who I've been a fan of lately, I was questioning at the start of the season or even a month into the season whether he was a real NHL player. Of course, he started the year in the American Hockey League. He had the concussion and the broken jaw due to the hit that was levied upon him unjustly by Tom Wilson in the playoffs last year. We all remember that. So that was a tough break. Now, another literal tough break for Zach Aston Reese. It seems like he's broken his hand in a fight that he was involved in the other night against the Florida Panthers. Again, maybe I'm just a professional fence sitter, but I feel like I can understand both sides of it. If you're challenged, like Aston Reese was the other night, and you feel like that you have no choice but to fight, I don't know how you just back out of that situation. At a certain point, you have to defend yourself, right? And you can't just turn and turtle. You might get hurt even worse if you're not throwing punches yourself. I think fights are stupid in hockey. I'm so glad working in college hockey with Robert Morris. I don't have to worry about fights. Yeah, there are some scrums and some hot-tempered moments after the whistle, and even during play, obviously. And there are some hits to the head. There are some things that get you suspended in college hockey that get you suspended in the NHL too. But we don't have to worry about the nonsense of bare-knuckle boxing on skates. I feel like I don't even know how that's still part of hockey at this point. The NHL is hoping it goes away organically, and for the most part it has. But when you have these situations, and you have a promising young player like Zach Aston Reese, who's coming on, who looks like he might be a really good depth forward for you, or even a player you can slot in with Crosby or Malkin, and he doesn't look out of place, to have him now be out, quote-unquote, long-term, according to Mike Sullivan, or longer-term, pardon me, to use a favorite phrase of the Penguins bench boss, I feel like it's such a shame and such a needless situation. So, fairly well, ZAR. Hope to see you back on the ice soon. And as the Penguins start a 5-game road trip, mostly out west, they're in Anaheim tonight to take on the Ducks, late night special. Patrick Hornqvist will also not be with them. Another concussion for Patrick. He's had some concussions pile up now, and he has 25 points in 33 games, so he's not just an intangible guy. Obviously, the Penguins signed him long-term because he can chip in offensively. He can play on any line. He can be on the power play. He always brings the energy. He's one of my favorite players to watch in all of hockey. So to hear that he has a concussion due to a puck to the head the other night against Florida, man, again, a difficult situation for the Penguins and for one of their players that I think is one of their stealth MVPs year in and year out, and I don't think I'm alone in that assessment. So the Penguins, having won, 10 of 11, like I said, not in a great spot going into this road trip. Yeah, they're going to have Crosby and Gensel together. They're going to have Malkin and Tanner Pearson together. Pearson scoring the other night against Florida, so good to see that. And they still have Brassard and Kessel and Sheahan. But the fourth line, Matt Cullen centering Derek Grant and Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson recently called up from the AHL. Yeah, that's not quite as good as it could be with the Penguins at full strength. Here's some good news, though. Injury-wise, Justin Schultz took the ice in warm-up gear, according to Shelley Anderson of Pittsburgh Hockey Now and others. So he's recovering from that broken left leg he suffered way back in October. I mentioned him in the first segment this morning, and so important to the Penguins' transition game and generating offense. And I think he's been the forgotten man in a lot of cases when we try to analyze this team. Getting Schultz back will be as good as any trade deadline acquisition the Penguins can make, considering the trade capital that they have. As for the Pirates, still doing nothing. Like most of Major League Baseball, it's a second straight boring hot stove season. Manny Machado and Bryce Harper are still out there. Surprise, surprise, the Pirates aren't in on them. But the Pirates haven't been really in on anybody. Where they signed Jordan Lyles, the left-handed pitcher, could be a swingman, starter, or reliever. They signed Lonnie Chisenhall. I think a good signing, a good buy low, maybe a high upside type of a guy, but so much money is being left on the table in Major League Baseball. And as usual, the Pirates are leading the way in leaving money on the table, or at least right up there with the best of them. And finally, the fourth pro team here in Pittsburgh, the team that I call games for during the spring and summer and hopefully deep into the fall. The Pittsburgh Riverhounds made an interesting signing. I thought a really good signing. Steven Dos Santos, native of Cape Verde, played for the Ottawa Fury the last 2 years. Very familiar with Hounds head coach and general manager Bob Lilly from his Rochester days. He won a championship with Lilly in Rochester in 2015. Dos Santos, a big forward, a guy you can play a ball into. He can hold the ball up. He can be a target in the box. Something the Hounds missed last year. No offense to Nico Brett, former Robert Morris standout, and who had a big breakout year for the Hounds last year. Scored a lot of goals, but not a big target, not someone that's a traditional striker in that sense. So that's one of the holes that I wanted to see the Hounds fill in this offseason, and they have done that in adding Dos Santos. So I'm excited to see where he fits in with the Hounds, and maybe he can help them be more clinical and a better finishing team in the penalty area, which really plagued them at times last season and might have cost them a playoff win and a long playoff run when you look at that first-round loss to Bethlehem Steel when they got goals from unlikely sources. but didn't have the big guys, the big men up front, the players you look to score, chip in. So Dos Santos, I feel like maybe the most exciting signing of this offseason, of promise for the Hounds who try to build off that big third-place finish last year, their best finish in the modern iteration of the USL. Okay, time for our second break. We'll come back for the third period of Gike's Got Game. I have a positive and a negative for the end of this show. I'm still deciding which one I'll go to first. Probably the positive. We'll go with the best person in sports when we come back on Gike's Got Game.
Hey, this is David from Pet Clinic, broadcasting from Mr. Small's Theater. You're listening to the River's Edge Radio Network.
Back inside Mr. Small's Theater. Thanks for checking out the show. This is Gike's Got Game every Friday. Well, it was every Friday. Now it's about to move to Monday. Monday at 9 is when we're looking at moving the show as we get rolling here in 2019. I am Matt Gika, and now on today's show, again, something new-ish. I always had certain segments on the program that I like to go back to, and I feel like there's a chance here to do something from both ends of the spectrum. I try to stay positive, but also I can't help but nitpicking the negative. Maybe I'm like most of you. So we'll start with, as I said before the break, we'll start with the positive. And if you're like me, you didn't know the name Cody Parkey before the start of last week. It turned out he was the kicker for the Chicago Bears of the NFL. And, kickers, as I've talked about on this show, I think it was just last month that I said I would eliminate place kicking from the NFL. I think it would make it a better sport, or from football in general. I think it would make it a better sport. I think it would add stakes to, early game drives. I think it would put more pressure on coaches and players, the players we come to see, to execute. I know I appreciate, and I've had a lot of blowback from that statement that I would eliminate place kicking. I appreciate the skill of place kicking. I think it's awesome to watch a guy knock down a 55-yarder at the buzzer to win a game. I think that's sweet. I appreciate that like I appreciate golfers or tennis players or anyone executing any bit of technique. Steven Stamkos' slap shot, I think, is so much fun to watch, so aesthetically pleasing to watch. And I feel that way about certain place kickers and certain situations. But for me, it doesn't fit in with the rest of the sport. And part of the reason why I argued against the continuation of place kicking in football was because I don't feel like it's fair to the kickers. I don't feel like they should be put in this spot like Cody Parkey was just a week ago when he bangs a kick off the upright and off the crossbar and it falls out and it falls no good at the end of the game. Chicago loses, and he gets the lion's share of the blame, not from his team, don't get me wrong, but from the public. He's the one who is essentially strung up in the town square because he missed a kick, when in fact, if any of the other players on the team did their jobs better, then they would have put him in a better position, or maybe he doesn't even have to make a kick at the end of the game to win it. So I give full credit to his teammates and his coaches. You look back at the post-game reports from the Bears' loss to the Eagles in the wild card round, and no one, at least not publicly, was blaming Cody Parkey. No one was saying it was his fault that the Bears lost, that they weren't going to continue what was a very positive season for them from the head coach on down. So I give them a lot of credit, but you could predict it. The social media blowback was going to be huge. He was going to be told to kill himself or never show his face in Chicago again. Ridiculous stuff that shows you the dark side of sports. And if you follow sports at all, if you're a passionate sports fan, I'm sure you've had some bad thoughts about players on your team, or especially players on the other team. But I'm not alone in that. I don't claim to be always above that. At least I don't claim to have been always above that. Maybe now I feel like I've taken a step back, and it's funny what covering these athletes will do to your frame of mind on sports. Now I just pull for everybody to succeed, home or away a lot of times. I don't want to see athletes take an overwhelming share of the blame when it's not their fault. And yeah, in the literal sense, if Cody Parkey makes that kick, the Bears win. So it is his fault that they lost in the end, at least if you want to pin it down to one play. But I give his teammates a lot of credit. And in particular, I love the first guy to go up to Cody Parkey after the kick bounced off the goalpost twice, the goalpost then the crossbar. It was inches away from going through. And as we found out later, it was tipped by a Green Bay Packer at the line of scrimmage. So by a Philadelphia Eagle at the line of scrimmage. I had the NFC North on my brain. But it may not have even been Cody Parkey's fault that the kick missed. Neither here nor there. It missed, and it was a big situation, and you knew what the response was going to be like from Bears fans or even football fans nationwide, and how toxic social media can be in those situations. But I love seeing offensive lineman Bobby Massey. I want to say his name again, Bobby Massey, number 70 on the Bears. If you saw a photo after the game of that situation, he gave Parkey a hug, and I can't say I've seen that too often in the immediate aftermath of a missed kick. Usually it's later on the sideline or whatever, but this was right after the kick was missed. After Parkey puts his head down and he's discouraged by the fact that he couldn't knock it through and send his team on to the divisional round, you see his teammate, Massey, 6'6", 317 pounds, a mountain of a man, giving Parkey, who's a regular-sized individual, at least in terms of big-time athletics, 6 foot 190 maybe, as Yahoo's Dan Wetzel put it in his column after the game. I just love seeing Massey give him a hug, and I feel like that's such an important message for teammates on a big stage like that to show to fans, to say, it's okay to put your arm around the guy, metaphorically speaking. It's okay to say, we're really disappointed that you missed the kick, but we still value you as a human being, and we still probably think that you can be a viable kicker at the NFL level. And that's what bothered me the most about the whole situation with Chris Boswell and the Steelers at the end of the year. Here's a guy who kicked great for 3 seasons. In 2015, remember, he was signed off the street after Jeff Reed fell into ill favor, and did great and was amazing, and probably was the reason why they won that playoff game at Kansas City, you'll recall. What do you make, 5 field goals, maybe even 6? I can't remember the exact number, but so many times he bailed out his teammates, and yet he's the one that takes all the blowback. And I actually give Mike Tomlin a lot of credit for not giving up on Chris Boswell, because he gave you a pretty good sample size there of 3 years to not let a couple of bad months, or a couple of shaky months, I won't even call them bad months, to make you feel like that he should just be thrown out. And so often it happens in football because the player contracts aren't guaranteed, especially, but also just the week-to-week nature of the game. You're way up and then you're way down just based on results, or at least a lot of fans are, and sometimes coaches and teams are too, and players are. It's just when you play once a week, you're going to have those wild emotional swings. And when you have single elimination playoffs, you're especially going to have those big swings. But I gave a lot of credit, and I still give credit to Mike Tomlin for sticking to Chris Boswell and putting him on the injured reserve at the end of the year. Maybe he wasn't really hurt, but that gives the Steelers a chance to bring him back. And I hope the Bears bring back Cody Parkey, because he missed 4 field goals in a game earlier in the year, all of them hitting the upright, which is rather incredible. I don't know what this guy has against goalposts, or what goalposts have against him, more appropriately. But he came back the following week after that 4-miss game and was the NFC Special Teams Player of the Week. So obviously he's a talented player. He's kicked for 3 or 4 NFL teams now. And but beyond all of that, beyond the football aspects, from the human aspect, I think the best person in the world of sports this week was Bobby Massey, who gave Parkey a hug after the kick was missed. And I think that's so important, like I said, for teammates to model this behavior for fans, because obviously fans are emotional. I've been there. I've said some things I've regretted in my living room. I thank God that social media wasn't around when I was a teenager, in fact. So in a lot of ways, it's the fault of social media and the fact that we all have a voice if we want it. But we can all be better human beings when it comes to sports, and we can all model good behavior, I think, for other fans especially. And I think the example shown by Bobby Massey makes him my best person in the world of sports for this week. We'll come back and tell you the worst from the world of sports, and it involves one of my passions, sports uniforms. And you may know where I'm going with this if you were following the NHL wire this week, if you will. The All-Star uniforms, well, let's just say I don't even know where to start on my disappointment in Adidas' effort there. So I'll try to find a way to start on the back half of this break as we go to overtime on Gike's Got Game.
Dun, dun, da, 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 dun, dun, da, 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 da. It's 2017. We've cleaned shit up here in Pittsburgh. Something that the governor has done that is just, it's got me giddy. I want money from Hempfield. That's what I want. Give us your cash. But why would you put trees up in front of a restaurant that views the river? If I'm going to a river-viewing restaurant, I want to actually view the river. Am I crazy?
Catch River Talk with Brian Crawford, Mondays at 10 a.m. here on the River's Edge.
This is the real shit, folks.
And we've reached overtime on Geik Scott Game. And thank you so much for taking the ride with me, nearing the end of the hour, 10 to 11 a.m. It's our last Friday show as we're transitioning to Monday at 9 a.m. It'll still be live, so you can still check it out on the Facebook page. It'll still be me, maybe a little less bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but I'm excited for the switch. And instead of finishing your week, you can start your week with Geik Scott Game and River Talk back-to-back. So there's a couple of heavy hitters right there. Brian Crawford, the host of The Ladder, of course, and he's been our producer for most of the run of Geik Scott Game. Let's go to the worst of the week in sports. We did the best, and as I've been alerted to today, in fact, Cody Parkey appeared on the Today Show. So the Bears kicker going through his level-headedness about the situation and knowing that it doesn't define him, even though a lot of people may want to use that moment to define him. So the more I cover sports, the more I realize it's such a parallel to life. You can let other people define you in certain ways, or you can define yourself and have that strong mental framework and build that fortress up. And not that you don't let people in, but there are certain situations, and especially the case that Cody went through last week, where you have to ride the storm out and have the courage of your own convictions. Easier said than done, especially with all the blowback we get and all the noise we see on social media these days. It used to be you just had a handful of friends and maybe some confidants who you would talk to, or you might bump into someone out in public, but now anyone's a public figure. Everyone's a public figure, really, if you want to be. Anyway, moving on from that to the worst of the week in sports, and I know this is rather frivolous, but so is sports in a lot of ways. The NHL All-Star Game will move to San Jose. It'll take that traveling circus to the Bay Area coming up in a couple of weeks, and looking forward to seeing who all makes the rosters. And I do like the 3-on-3 tournament, so to speak. They've been playing for the past, this will be the fourth season, I think, for that. It started in Nashville back in 2016. I've been a fan of it. It helped up the octane of an event that was definitely losing its luster at 5-on-5 as a traditional 60-minute hockey game. And covering it last year, as I had the chance to in Tampa Bay, it was pretty amazing, I thought, to see. And all the open ice, it I think makes players try a little harder. It gives them room to do some different things and make it more like the NBA All-Star Game, where players feel the freedom to show off a little bit. And I think we saw plenty of that last year. And I still love the skills competition. I think that is still a highlight of the weekend, just to see those players plying their trade and showing off these talents that they've worked so hard to develop over the years. But, all-star jerseys and uniforms in general often get ridiculed. And over the years, I've been pretty permissive because I feel like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you try something crazy and if you make it really way out and wild, then you get criticized from the conservative folks. And if you do the other way, if you go really conservative, or maybe in the case of baseball, you just have the players wear their regular uniforms, which I don't mind, but I think MLB probably gets some critiques from people who say, well, that's kind of boring, right? Make something different for the game, make it a little more flashy. Adidas, the NHL's official apparel manufacturer, and I guess you'd call it equipment manufacturer in some ways, because the jersey is part of the equipment. They tried their hand once again in creating all-star jerseys this year, and much to my disappointment and almost confusion, they basically punted on it. And so this is my worst thing from the world of sports this week. And we have the graphic available, I think, Brian, so we'll show it to you. This is just the Metropolitan Division teams. And don't let the backdrop fool you, where these jerseys are submerged in water, kind of make it like a shark's motif. These are all black and white uniforms, black, white, and gray. They just took all the color away from the regular uniforms, and that's what these teams are going to wear in the 3-on-3 pseudo tournament on the Sunday of All-Star Weekend. And they didn't even, actually they did something different from that. They didn't just take the color away. They made them all look the same with the same sleeve stripes and hem stripes. So I I'm not even sure what this is supposed to be. I understand that black and white is kind of in right now. You saw what the Chicago Blackhawks wore outdoors for the Winter Classic, maybe. I guess I was okay with it as a one-off, but to have every team shed all of its color and just go not monochromatic, but basically monochromatic, if you consider white not a color, and I would side with you in this case. I'm afraid this is going to look terribly boring on All-Star Sunday, and Adidas could have done anything, but here it seems like they put about 2 minutes of thought into it. Yeah, we'll just take away all the color, make it black and white, and yeah, we'll put a gray stripe on the sleeves and be done with it. Wow. I think this is a dereliction of duty on Adidas' part. For the most part, I've liked some of the changes that have come with the changeover to Adidas, but not this one. This is a big swing and a miss. Or if you are going to use the hockey terminology, this is a whiff on an empty net. This is crazy. Do something. This is a lack of doing anything, and for me, that's as unforgivable as anything. You're an apparel manufacturer. You're into fashion, so to speak. So take a risk. Make it somewhat controversial. I guess this is controversial for me, but for most people, they're going to look at these uniforms and say, "What am I missing? Is the color capability turned off on my TV screen?" So no clue what they were going for here. I'm willing to be proved wrong, but as I've said over the years, and as I've said on this show when I was criticizing the LA Kings uniforms for their lack of color, you got to put something out there to attract the eye, especially in the era of high def. I don't know what we're doing. We're going back to black and white TVs with this one. So anyway, sometimes retro is good. In this case, this faux retro look I think is terrible. And so for the NHL All-Star Game, I'll still be watching, but I don't really understand what the thinking was behind this one, no matter what the press release might say. And you can go to Chris Creamer's website, sportslogos.net, for a full workup on that. Chris was very kind, I think, in his take on this. I would have been a lot more critical of it, as I just was here to wrap up this edition of Geiks Got Game. Thanks for sticking with me through the hour and getting past a little bit the 11 o'clock hour here. Have a great weekend. I'll be spending most of mine down at the Army Island Sports Center. You can check out the men's hockey team back in Atlantic hockey action tonight at 7 o'clock, Saturday at 4 o'clock. Skate with the Colonials afterwards, so there's my plug for my employer. I always try to get that in when I can. Good college hockey, though, with the Pens out of town especially, and the Pens playing late at night. Hey, take an opportunity to get up close to the action down there at the island. That's it for me. I'm done. We'll talk to you on Monday, other side of the weekend, here on the River's Edge.